The views expressed on this podcast are those of the participants, not of Reuters News.
The United States is engaged in another war in the Middle East, and like previous battles, an exit looks elusive. President Donald Trump kicked off the conflict on Saturday, launching coordinated strikes with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and killing Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Iran has retaliated by attacking US bases in the Gulf and by launching rockets and drones towards the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Bahrain. The conflict has disrupted production of oil and natural gas and brought traffic through the narrow Strait of Hormuz, the key shipping lane south of Iran, to a halt. Energy prices have soared, raising concerns about a revival of inflation around the world. A prolonged conflict could reshape oil and gas markets, undermine the appeal of financial hubs in the Middle East, and potentially redraw geographic alliances across the region. We'll get into all of this and more on this week's Viewsroom. It's Amy.
And it's Jonathan, and this is the Viewsroom, your weekly podcast from Breakingviews that dives into the biggest stories in corporate finance, economics, and business. And Amy, it feels almost like 2022 again, just from the other way around. We were watching this gigantic buildup of military assets in the Middle East. For weeks, people were talking about, kind of U.S. posture ramping up, even as there was chatter about a deal. An actual invasion seemed unthinkable along various lines. And then all of a sudden, the worst case scenario breaks out. And of course, it's been seemingly absolute chaos in the region. Regional allies of the United States have immediately been embroiled in the conflict. Where its lines begin and end seems almost completely unclear at the moment. And to top it all off, we now have cascading problems for the energy markets that are going to rebound around the world. So it kind of feels like all of these past few years, which were so disruptive in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we're just going to perhaps kind of run through all of that at double speed, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the most surprising things for me, we had obviously been talking about this, many times in our team about whether this Iran situation was actually going to unfold or not. But it seems to create all of the types of problems that Donald Trump didn't seem to want to have, and certainly campaigned that he was not going to do, like another war outside of the US. Inflation is obviously still a problem in America. Affordability is what the Democrats are focusing on ahead of the midterms later this year. And then, as you said, there's all the stuff about how this impacts the global economy, most notably, obviously, energy prices. And we have our colleagues here, Yawen Chen, who has been focusing on the oil and gas markets really well over the past few years, but again, has really delved into this over the past few days, and George Hay, our EMEA editor of Breakingviews, who has spent time in many of the places we're going to be talking about today, and is also very interested in oil and gas and all of the implications of Iran. So, George, Yawen, you're very welcome.
Hey there.
Great to be here.
So, George, we all have these moments as journalists where you wake up on a Saturday and something dramatic and huge that you have been somewhat expecting happens. So I just wondered, what were your initial thoughts with this attack? Because, as I said, we had been obviously talking about the fact that this might happen.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with this was that we had kind of expected, if I had to bet this time last week, I would have thought that there would definitely be an attack, an aerial assault of some description, and it would probably involve the US and Israel, which it did. But I would have assumed that, given this is all going on at the same time as a kind of negotiations, the diplomatic talks between Iran and the US, you kind of thought it would be some kind of surgical thing to kind of force Iran's hand and make them do what Donald Trump wants, which is to kind of restrict their nuclear capability so that they don't make a nuclear bomb. So I thought that would be the kind of, upshot. And when I saw it on Saturday morning, I thought, well, this is what this is. But as soon as I heard Trump speak about what he was doing, that all kind of went out in the window, because it wasn't a surgical kind of strike. It wasn't forcing anyone's hand. It was just an all-out assault on a range of different targets across Iran. And in particular, what he said was, um, he was rather surprisingly saying, I want, we're doing this, we're coming in and we're kind of taking out various people. But the whole idea is that the Iranian people will now rise up and basically do regime change, which goes way beyond what you would have thought, and also way beyond what we immediately thought was a kind of rational or kind of sensible thing to do. Because rather than make it surgical strike with defined objectives, forcing them to the negotiating table or forcing them to do a deal, it was more like, well, completely open-ended thing of, you have to have kind of regime change effected by the Iranian people for this to be a success. And that is pretty hard to do.
Right. And I think that kind of retroactively raises the question of how on the level those negotiations or their stated objectives were in the first place, right? Which
Well, you could
in
say
turn
that, yeah.
raises the question of what an exit scenario even looks like, if such a thing can possibly exist.
Absolutely.
I mean, just to level set, obviously this conflict has immediately broadened. The human toll is, clearly enormously vast. We sitting in our seats kind of in the UK and the US, obviously a big part of this is the economic toll that's going to unspool for this. So just to level set for a moment, Yawen, I was maybe wondering if you could walk us through kind of what the situation is in the region, how important this is for oil and gas supplies, and how the conflict is beginning to affect that.
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest surprise is, like George said, that this is a complete game changer. The supreme leader was dead, and it immediately triggered panic across the Strait of Hormuz, which is this really key channel where about a fifth of the world's oil and gas passes through every day. And despite past tensions or wars in the region, the Strait of Hormuz was never closed. But this time, because you could be using drones to do much easier attacks on the ships, and the stakes are so high because the U.S. is now an active party in the conflict. So you started seeing very quickly that insurers, ship owners, and traders are actively avoiding the strait, even though Iran, I think,
And just to be clear, the Strait of Hormuz, can you maybe explain to listeners kind of how important that crucial bottleneck is?
yeah, it's extremely narrow. I wish I have a map to show you how narrow it is, but you can easily see. And I think I saw some description is the size of the Rhode Island, and it's
okay.
yes, and
Well,
it's just off.
also another way is it's the distance of the English Channel as well, roughly. Someone was saying that earlier.
Right,
If that
right.
helps.
And it's right next to Iran and a few other Gulf countries, and behind it you have all the important energy producers like Qatar, Saudi, the UAE. They are all these massive oil and gas producers, and they need to move their barrels. So very quickly, even on the production side, you see Qatar saying we're shutting down our gas facilities. Iraq was shutting their oil fields because storage was getting full. They couldn't get the tankers to carry the oil and gas out. And that is that is how important that channel was, really. And since we've never had this kind of closure before, nobody really has a very accurate projection of how the prices are reflecting things. I mean, gas did jump quite a bit in the initial 2 days. I think even now, it's probably up 70-80% from before the attacks, which has huge.
I'm right in saying that's on the order of magnitude or larger than what happened after Russia invaded Ukraine, right?
Well, that's the thing that is kind of
Not quite
important here,
yet.
right? I mean, it's not. I mean, the oil price. This is to an extent something that is a bit of a head scratcher for people who watch these markets, because it's the anything to do with a block of Hormuz has always been like, well, the oil price just zooms up way above 100. Pick a number, basically. That's a complete disaster.
Where are we at now, George, in terms of the
we're
oil price as
we're
of
now
today?
kind of eight in the 80s, but
For
it's
oil
by
prices.
comparison for oil prices in the 80s, but in when Russia invaded Ukraine, they shot up to, and people thought Russian oil supply would be kind of basically frozen out of the market, and the oil prices shot up to way over 120, and stayed very elevated for a long time. And gas prices are also way off where they were at that point. So
I think
we
they were
haven't
up like
got to that level.
300%, yeah, in comparison.
Yeah, in Russia. But there are various reasons for that, which Yarwin has kind of been investigating.
I think the
So that is
fundamentals are
sort of
quite
the
different. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Jan, because the timing of our podcast is brilliant because you just wrote a piece that's going out, that is actually out this morning, really kind of exploring this idea of that, in some ways, investors or the market is not really getting how serious or prolonged this could be. And it's not really maybe to suggest that they're wrong, but they certainly are looking for maybe more information to sort of suggest that this won't be over relatively quickly. Is that fair? And what's your kind of assessment in terms of how could this actually get worse in terms of for oil prices?
Yeah, before I get to that, just a few reasons why this is where oil prices are. I think in the run up to the whole attack, there were several weeks of time for investors to position their long positions in oil and gas. You can see it from like several ETFs running up 30% year to date, where S&P is almost flat. So it became kind of a sell the news event on that sense. And then you've got very weak fundamentals, right? There's a lot of inventory floating around. Iran was front loading all the exports because they knew something might be happening. China was stockpiling, which China is very important because it's one of the biggest, I think it's probably the biggest buyer. And they were stockpiling a lot of crude every day. So all these things provide some kind of cushion. And also, I think there's a shock element where, since it's never happened before that the Strait of Hormuz was closed, so you kind of are like, how do we respond to this? And then at the same time, you expect the U.S. midterms to come, and Trump's pain threshold for like $100 oil probably isn't that huge. That's kind of the bet you'll be placing on.
Well, that's the thing, because I think it's worth reiterating that we're talking on Wednesday the 4th. Things are moving extremely quickly, but Trump came out yesterday saying that the U.S. Navy would try to offer military escort for any tankers going through the strait, and I believe shipping volume through there has effectively ceased, right? And also claimed that organs of the U.S. government would step forward to provide insurance. I mean, look, I know we're very, very early here, so it's hard to gauge the feasibility or the practicality of these proposals, but do you think we see the market taking that seriously? Joe, first approximation?
It's definitely a very positive headline. I think when that announcement dropped, you see oil prices move a few points, like within seconds. But then it has gone back up ever since then. I think it's also because people realize that even though the U.S. might have the money to do it, there's not enough naval ships that's going through the water, and they could become targets as well, because this is quite different from the 1980s where you're fighting, where you are protecting them when the war is not actively involving you. And I think if you could look at the Red Sea situation as a gauge, it took a long time for container ship owners to consider even going back to the Red Sea, even after Trump decided to have this deal with the Houthis, which is a Iran proxy in Yemen, and they're still active there. So I think because the stakes are so high, you don't want your tankers to be on fire carrying so much volume, and then your crew might be killed in the event. So I think even though he's giving a lot of good headlines as we speak, as he is probably now growing increasingly worried about oil, I don't think this is going to be an immediate relief.
Can I, George, pivot to you just on, I mean, as I said, you have traveled through the Middle East an awful lot in the past couple of years. I've been really kind of struck by how much, the Middle East and Middle Eastern companies have become such a huge part of our coverage now as well in EMEA. I mean, this is, you've got US bases being attacked. You have drones flying over lots of areas where expats and tourists have, really kind of flocked to. What are your thoughts just in terms of how this all impacts that region, just in terms of their economic growth or or what they had hoped, their economic growth would be based on?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a massive deal. Just the sometimes just video footage and kind of pictures are, just really cut through, and certainly that Iranian drones striking the one of its key hotels on Saturday evening was a real kind of like eye-opening moment.
That was the Dubai hotel, right? In that, yeah.
In Dubai, yeah, and
Yep.
and basically, so the UAE in particular it's the main economy in the Middle East that has kind of successfully pivoted, even though in Abu Dhabi it's got huge amounts of oil as well. It's basically pivoted its economy, and it's a kind of poster child for how you do that. And Dubai, lots of Britons go to Dubai, lots of Europeans go there, and they go there as tourists as well as business people. And the whole kind of cliche is it's like the Switzerland of the Middle East, or it's a kind of calm haven in a tough region, and that's just got completely, that vibe has been shattered. They've had to, as soon as you're closing airspace and basically being completely under attack as they have been, that really does change the game. Like I should say that the UAE, most of the things that have got through have been kind of relatively small scale drones. All the big kind of missiles, ballistic missiles that were shot, pretty much there were almost 200 of them, and only one of them got through. So they've been shooting these things down, and they're very keen to project the image that they can kind of deal with this. But I think it's just if you're looking from a kind of Western investor point of view, or kind of FDI into the region, it can't not have some kind of impact. And even in the kind of relative appeal of different bits in the Middle East, there's this whole kind of backdrop to what we're talking about here, which is like Western companies have known that they really need to push more people into Riyadh, because that's where a lot of the business is, and the sovereign wealth fund in Saudi. But a lot of their staff prefer to be in Dubai just because it's more livable, and they're kind of generally seen as a kind of better place to hang out. But I'm kind of interested in whether that changes at the margin. I don't think it'll change kind of completely wholesale, but I think you might find a lot more senior people at JP Morgan, senior people at HSBC go, oh, actually Riyadh looks all right. I mean, clearly we don't know. I should caveat that we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe Saudi gets drawn into this more, but that's the kind of vibe. It is quite a big shift.
Maybe they have to come back to London.
Maybe the weather's better out there.
Right, and it's not just corporates that are going to have to be reassessing their posture towards the region, right? It's also these countries themselves, Saudi, UAE, Qatar, etc. Like, they have been pulled into a conflict that they, did not choose the terms of, that is leading to real material damage, and that will lead to people dying, and potentially destabilizing governments around the region, right?
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
Yeah. So I think on that deeply uncertain note, that's as good a place as any to wrap it up. George and Yarwin, thank you so much for joining us on the Viewsroom.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was produced by Cheryl Pena in New York and Gregory Garner in Toronto. You can listen to a new episode of the Viewsroom every Thursday on the Reuters app or your favorite platform. And don't forget to tune in to our sister podcast, The Big View, every Tuesday, as well as the other great podcasts from the Reuters team. If you like what you heard, please follow the Viewsroom and let us know what you thought. We have a new email address where you can send feedback, which is breakingviews-podcasts@tr.com. And check out our views on the biggest stories in business and finance every day on breakingviews.com and on reuters.com.